From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 38 years. Now, I've always liked using quotes by Mark Twain to make points on the podcast. Lies, damn lies, and statistics being a favorite when talking about bail reform and their so-called studies. But another famous American for memorable quotes is Benjamin Franklin. Lie down with dogs, wake up with fleas. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. Franklin even said back in the 1760s, there are no gains without pains, which every gym rat today would recognize as no pain, no gain. But as he was also one of the founding fathers and a signatory to the Declaration of Independence, a quote famously attributed to him in 1776 was, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." In other words, we have to stick together or they'll kill us one at a time. And I think this is especially true in the bail bond business and these ongoing attacks we face from so-called bail reformers. But all too often we look at that office across the street and think that guy, that other bail bondsman, he's the biggest threat to our business. When in truth, the biggest threat comes from the people who want to eliminate the entire industry. They don't care about you versus him. They want to get rid of all of you. Now, in past episodes, we've spoken to Gerald Madrid from New Mexico and Kirk Shaw from New Jersey, both of whom had the rug pulled out from under them in their states. But we've also spoken to the late Charlie White and Shelley Alexander from the Tennessee Bail Association, John Looney from the Montana Bail Agents Association, Ken Good from the Professional Bondsman of Texas, and Nicole Martinez, who's building the Colorado Association of Professional Sureties after all the attacks on bail in that state. And of course, I'm personally a part of the Kansas Bail Agents Association. And it's so important that we have these national and state associations to try and hold the line against these attacks on bail. So today we're going to be visiting another state, my next door neighbor, Missouri. Larry Newman is the president of the Missouri Alliance of Professional Bail Bond Agents, or MAP-BBA, and a longtime bail bondsman in Missouri. He was also selected as the 2023 Bail Agent of the Year by PBUS, the Professional Bail Agents of the United States. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks. Well, let me get this first part out of the way. Both KU and MU used to have a pretty intense rivalry, especially in basketball, at least until MU ran away from the Big 12. So how's that SEC thing working out for them?
Oh, well, there's still a rivalry there. I mean, we look to the West and
they got to throw another.
Still there.
I think this last season they got to have a basketball game together, but there was the old famous border war and sit down Norm and all that stuff from, I'm dating myself on that. It's been a long time since Norm Stewart was the coach. Anyway, so tell us more about yourself. How did you get into bail? Why are we talking to you today?
Well, I was a longtime insurance agent since back in '87. In around 2000, I was asked to get into law enforcement, and so I became a police officer and then later a detective with the Jasper County, Missouri Sheriff's Office. When I retired, I was approached by a bail bondsman, and I used him as a resource as in my bail bond or my investigator situation. Anyway, I was asked to become a bail bondsman. Like 99% of police officer, I had no idea what a bail bondsman did. All I knew was when I arrested them, threw them into jail, and they should stay there forever. The bail bondsman came and got them out. So I learned a little bit about that. And in 2010, my wife and I started our own bail bond company and have been doing that ever since in Southwest Missouri. I observed that there was no state professional association in Missouri back around 2012. And so I began working and trying to build a cooperation together with bail bondsmen in Missouri. And And in 2016, we started the Missouri Alliance of Professional Bail Bond Agents. Currently the chairman of the Council of Presidents, which is a once-a-month meeting between all state presidents of state bail associations across the United States. And I'm also on the board of directors for PBUS, Professional Bondsman of the United States.
Excellent. So you were a police officer at Jasper County. Is that Joplin?
Yeah, Joplin area.
Right.
Yes.
So you would have retired just before the tornado, or just after?
Yes, just before.
Just before.
Just before.
I know my son was in band at that time, and I know that we were band boosters for that and associated, and all that, and we had taken a trailer full of clothes and other stuff, donations that people had made. We used the band trailer to take it down. I don't know that I've ever seen anything. I mean, I haven't ever been in a war zone, but I can't imagine that it would have been much different. It was pretty devastating to drive through there and just see entire neighborhoods just completely flattened. It was, anyway, that's not a bail topic, but it still lingers with you seeing that sort of effect. I mean, we're all here, Tornado Alley and all that sort of stuff, but you don't really think of those F5s coming through and just, flattening the ground. It was pretty rough.
Right. So I live about 12 miles northeast of Joplin, and we had debris in our backyard, in our trees and stuff. So it was a wide ranging, even though we didn't have damage, we still had the debris. And I knew a lot of people that were in the middle of that tornado.
So in real broad strokes, and we'll get more granular as we go along, but what's going on with bail in Missouri, just from, I guess we refer to this as the 30,000-foot view?
Well, in Missouri, there's been a movement to eliminate bail. We've blocked that successfully. What we learned several years ago and my relationship with judges goes back before bail, and I knew a lot of them. Of course, it's a small area, so I've known a lot of them for a long time. But what we did discover from those judges is that the George Soros group had successfully implanted people in these national judges training programs to try to influence the movement away from victims and pro-criminal, which is the whole idea. Bail is kind of a major sideline of that, but the get rid of the police and let the criminals go, and that whole ball all goes together, and bail is a critical part of that.
Sure, the basically cutting off the pillar of criminal justice. I mean, there's those. I mean, I've mentioned on this podcast before that we're just the first step. When you attack bail, they're not trying to stop at bail. I mean, and we saw that after the George Floyd riots, where they stopped talking about bail. Then it all became defund the police. We don't want any police. It's like they forgot all about bail until that became unpopular, and it's like, oh, well, maybe we need to take a step back and take another run at this.
Well, they were very thorough in this. The defund the police, we were part of that. Get rid of bail, because bail gives closure for the victim, because in bail, as you know, we're the ones that make sure the defendant shows up in court, and so the victim gets closure more rapidly than if they didn't have bail,
or at all.
Correct.
Somebody disappears and you don't see him again for 5-10 years. That case is probably going to get dismissed, but there's no satisfaction on that whatsoever. Let's hit the news here real quick. A couple of cases out of Missouri that have been in the news here, and maybe kind of talk about those a little bit. The first one we actually talked to Jeff Barton earlier this year about was the Wayne Lozier case.
Yes.
And so Wayne is now out of prison, but he was. I can't blame him for taking the plea. I mean, if you spend 3 or 4 years in prison and they give you an opportunity to just say, okay, just take this plea and walk out the door. But what is your take on how that's going to affect, I guess not so much, bounty hunting or fugitive apprehension in just Missouri, because, if this is a federal case, so they could basically start adopting this, if you're in cross the line in any way, or, if you get just a little sideways, are the feds going to step in and start arresting bounty hunters for this? Or what's your take on how this is going to shake out down the road? Or was this a one-off deal?
Well, it took a little bit after Wayne was arrested for it to finally hit in Missouri. When the trial came, the Missouri Department of Insurance investigator and the police officers all testified, and the jury was told not to listen to them, not to listen to their testimony. But what it did do is the Missouri Department of Insurance began to be a lot more intent on overseeing minor missteps of the bail bonds. One of the reasons that Wayne Lozier was convicted was that he did fail to notify local law enforcement before he went to that address, which is a misdemeanor in Missouri.
Right.
So most of us who have a close working relationship with law enforcement, a lot of the law enforcement officers that work for these departments in my area, I know personally and have known for a long time. So the way the state law reads is you have to notify the local jurisdiction before going to a location. So the common practice is to pick up the phone, you call dispatch and tell them who you are. We're going to this location. And a lot of times they'll send officers to help us. After Wayne Lozier's case, the department determined that making a phone call to the local department was not sufficient. You must go there and in person and notify them and show them your paperwork before you go to a location, which most of us understand is sometimes almost impossible. But we did have some agents in Missouri who went to the local police department to notify them, show their paperwork. The office was closed. The sign on the door said call dispatch. They called dispatch, told them what was happening. They were told you're okay. They went to a location, picked up their defendant, left, put them back in custody. And the Department of Insurance has fined them for violating that rule. They went there. The place was closed. When you're chasing fugitives, you don't often get the opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, stay where you're at until I get a chance to go talk to law enforcement.
Exactly.
Okay. So it has had a detrimental effect. The issues that I was talking about before with the court and judge training has caused trouble across the state of Missouri. There are pockets where the good bondsmen have succeeded in, based on their reputation with the courts, in the courts getting away from release everybody for free and are back now to placing surety bonds on defendants because they know we will take care of it.
So, I mean, I know that Kansas really doesn't have that same fine regimen that Missouri has from the Department of Insurance. So it's like if you get a complaint, they'll come and they'll slap your wrist or whatever. But I know Missouri Department of Insurance, like, because I've seen some other, they really like levying their fines. I don't know if that's because it's revenue for the office that investigates that or what the deal is. But I've seen lots of things where it's like, oh, you check, well, here's $1,000 fine, $1,500 fine. Just you've done something. It's not a crime, but hey, it's a regulatory violation. So now we're going to fine you for that. So
yeah, fines are a way to raise money for any department in any state or federal agency. So yes, it is a fundraising issue.
Well, let's talk about the other one that's sort of in the news, especially in the Kansas City area, and that's this Shanetta Boswell case. And that just happened here last week, I think. She's a woman who stabbed and killed a paramedic who was trying to help her and then tried to steal the ambulance as well. She had just been bonded a day or two earlier for biting a police officer. And despite the fact that this was a surety bond, she posted, and because I always look at these and go, well, this is probably a signature bond. And unfortunately, it wasn't in this case. Most of the news coverage and social media chatter discussing the bond that I've seen is questioning how she was able to bond at all. Have you, as anything, gone down in Springfield area or Southwest Missouri on that, or?
No, but my immediate answer to your question would be the judge sets the bond.
Right.
The judge makes a determination on whether it should be a cash bond, surety bond, or a release on your own recognizance. The information given to the judge by the prosecutor, who is the person that gets the report from police, the judge is the one that makes those decisions. So part of protecting the community sits on the shoulders of the judge. Now, having said that, if a judge sets a surety bond, low surety bond, high surety bond, whatever, it is our responsibility as the bail bondsman to do a risk assessment. We do a more thorough risk assessment than any other part of the criminal justice system. We are looking for a defendant. Are they apt to run? That's number one. Number two, are they a threat to someone, or are they a threat to the community if I should facilitate their release? So we have to look at that. It's a complicated situation where the information we have is far more thorough for a judge to use in making his decision. But then again, the judge doesn't have the time, and there's no facility to where the judge can call me and say, I want you to do a risk assessment here.
Right.
So it's a little complicated, but for someone to bond someone out of jail who bites a police officer, that shows a lack of respect for the law. So I'm probably not going to issue a bond on that person anyway. So they would be sitting in jail if it was me.
Understandable. Now, there is a lot of finger pointing going on in that. I know that the prosecutor in, I think it's Clay County is where that occurred, has been in the news blaming Missouri Supreme Court Rule 3301. And so, hey, it's nothing I can do. The judge has to set a bond because of that. Can you tell us a little bit more about this Supreme Court Rule 3301? Because I think that's
Sure.
been kind of the big issue in Missouri.
It has, and let's go back to the beginning. Many years ago, there was a statutory law change in the Constitution, and it established what was called the Missouri rule. The Missouri rules changed the way Supreme Court justices are chosen in Missouri. The way they are chosen now is that the Missouri attorneys, the Missouri Bar Association, is the entity that selects the judge and submits that person to the governor for the governor's appointment to the Missouri Supreme Court. Typically, nationwide, most of the time, it is the governor who selects a candidate and submits it to the Senate. But this changed that. This is the Missouri Bar Association. This is the attorneys from across Missouri making this selection. In my private conversations with the governor, he explained to me that if the Missouri Bar Association selects a liberal, left-leaning judge and submits it to him for his appointment, the option he has is to appoint them or to reject that nomination and ask them for another. And he said, quite honestly, Larry, if I reject their nominee, they're going to send me one worse. And so in the state of Missouri, where 75% of the legislature is Republican and conservative, where nearly all of the elected officials state elected officials are Republican. We have a 100% left-leaning Democratic Supreme Court. So Rule 3301 establishes how bonds are set. So,
well, let me interrupt you for just a second there
sure.
on the merit selection on the Supreme Court justice. So I know that in Kansas we have, and actually this is an issue that's coming up because there's going to be a constitutional amendment on the ballot to change Supreme Court justices to elected positions rather than merit selection. But even in the system we have now, the Bar Association, there's a 9-member panel or committee. I forget exactly. It's a nominating committee. 4 of those members are members of the bar. The chair is a member of the bar, and then 4 of those members are private citizens or someone that's appointed by. A couple of them are appointed by the governor. A couple of them are appointed by the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. And so they have that group there. It's still obviously ABA or Kansas Bar Association heavy because you've got a 5-4 majority on there. But they don't get to select just a single candidate. So, I mean, they have to submit 3 potential candidates to the governor, and the governor can choose between those 3 or reject and give me a separate panel. So, I mean, are you telling me that in Missouri, that nominating commission or whatever it is, they only send 1 judge to the court, or do they send a panel of judges and the governor can choose from that panel?
It's been my experience that they send 1 candidate to the governor.
Well, that sounds like, they're just, you've abdicated the governor's responsibility picking those judges.
Well, the judge can appoint that nominee or he can reject the nominee and they'll send him another. And that his point was, former governor, his point was, they're going to send me one worse.
Right.
But when you have a 100% Democrat left-leaning
Bar
Supreme Court and Bar Association in a tremendously Republican state, it's difficult because the courts, you can't appeal to the court for things that the court doesn't want. So they're not going to hear your appeal. That takes away from a person's right to court hearing.
Well, and actually going back to Lozier, I believe the federal judge he had there was a judge that had originally come out of the Missouri Supreme Court, had retired, and then one of the senators from Missouri actually put a hold on him to stop him from becoming a federal judge, and they managed to get around that because he was so pro-criminal in the original judge that he had then. So anyway, sorry, I broke up on you. So the Missouri Supreme Court essentially adopted Rule 3301, very liberal court. So tell me more about 3301.
3301 sets the release options that local judges have to use. Local judges have to follow the rules that the Supreme Court set forth in judiciary. So Rule 3301 is quite lengthy, and you'd have to go read it to get everything. But the highlights are that if a person is unable to afford bail, that they should be released on an OR bond unless they are a danger to the community. How does the judge determine if they're a danger to the community? There's no thorough risk assessment available as the ones that we as bail bondsmen use. So it's difficult for the judge. He has to rely on the prosecutor, who relies on the police officers that write the report and did the investigation. So the other thing is, in Missouri, we have they have mandated in 3301 10% to the court, which means that instead of paying a bail bondsman, you give 10% to the court, take off, go. They forfeit the bond, money goes to the state. That a lot of what's in 3301, which basically is your methods of release, what you can control. After the St. Louis riots, 2014, those were major issues in Missouri. And the legislature changed the statutes on numerous criminal statutes to make the punishment less severe. They also, the courts changed 3301 and the rules, underlying rules to that. When a defendant walks into court and the judge can simply say, can you afford bail? And the defendant says, no, I can't afford anything. So the judge would be required to consider an ROR, or at least on own recognizance. There's no investigation, and I've been personally a party to this, standing in the courtroom with the family, who were quite wealthy, and the judge was not allowed by Supreme Court rule to question the defendant on possible resources for funds to be put on bail. So everybody got out ROR. Having worked in the sheriff's office and in courtrooms, the very first defendant that goes in front of a judge and says, I got no money, and the judge releases him on ROR, that story goes through the jail like it just floats on the air. It immediately, every defendant's going to go into court and has to be released because they ain't got no money. Okay. You and I both know that the defendant is not the client in a bail bond. The bail bond client is the guarantor of the bond. The defendant is the subject of the bond. So we have numerous ways of making sure that our defendants show up for court, save the taxpayers' money by getting them out of the jail where they don't have to be fed and taken care of. And we facilitate the closure to the victim because they get closure faster by the defendant showing up and the victims are taken care of. All of those things were a target from the left and created the problems we've had over the years. What I'm seeing in Missouri is there are pockets and areas, like in mine, where the judges have said, enough of this stuff, we're going back to setting bonds. And so in my area, in the 2 or 3 counties around me, the judges have no longer do the ORs. They are bonds. They are surety bonds. They've even stopped the 10% to the court, because the 10% to the court, which is happening nationwide, the 10% to the court basically means that the defendant puts 10% down with the court. The judge calls an attorney and says, hey, got this guy, put 10% with court. If you represent him, you'll get that money.
Right. Yeah.
The attorneys have told me they lobbied the judges for that because everybody was getting a public defender. And that's one of the other rules in 3301, that judges are required. All you have to say is, I don't have any money, and the judge immediately orders you to have a public defender. So the private attorneys, criminal attorneys, were losing money. They went to the judges to say, hey, just do 10% to the court instead of giving it to the bail bondsman, and then we can get that 10% for our time. That's what 10% to the court is.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know any lawyers that are taking cases for $250. But when I was reading the Rule 3301, one of the things was the language sort of mirrors some of the statutory language of Missouri statute. But basically, the court rule says that the defendant shall be released on a signature bond unless the court makes certain findings. And basically, it creates this presumption for a signature bond. Now, when I read the statute, though, in preparation for our conversation here, the statute says the court may release on a signature bond, and those two words, shall and may, those have a big differential meaning statutorily. So, I mean, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is generally local rules or even Supreme Court rules are supposed to be made within the 4 corners of the statute. not
Correct.
beyond that. So what's the logic here? I mean, I can see where your local judges say, hey, the statute says this, we're going to follow the statute. What's the logic in the Supreme Court just deciding to create its own law?
Privately, the judges have told me if I do that, then I am in jeopardy of losing my seat on the bench and losing my pension. So they feel pressured to follow what the Supreme Court says. Now, in my talking to legislators from all over the state while I'm in the State House, there is very much unrest with the Missouri plan, and there are people working hard in the legislature to change that back to a typical appointment situation where the recommendation comes from the governor and the Senate would approve that person to the court.
Oh, to the court for the, the
So, and for exactly what you are saying, the rules promulgated by the Supreme Court and handed down to the local judges exceed the bounds of statute. And that's causing the unrest in the legislature wanting to put a stop to that.
So I did watch a synopsis on Rule 3301 from basically a video from the Federalist Society, and they interviewed J.R. Hobbs, who was one of the co-chairs of the Missouri Task Force on Criminal Justice, which that's the commission that basically created these rules that the Supreme Court adopted. And Amy Fight, who was a prosecutor out of Christian County, which is sort of down in your area, I think a little to the east of you.
Yeah.
And this group had a number of members appointed. And when I looked over all the people that were on it, and none of them seemed especially pro bail. Kim Gardner, one of the earliest of the progressive prosecutors in St. Louis, was on the task force as well. Kind of curious, and this was just me and my own curiosity, is what happened to Amy Fight? She just disappeared off the face of the earth.
She did. I have not heard anything about her for quite some time. I do not know.
I mean, she seemed like she was a career prosecutor. I mean, had all these things, and it seems like she wasn't terribly comfortable with the direction this went. But then the last thing I saw was, hey, former prosecutor swears in new prosecutor, and then there's nothing. It's like, this is really weird. There's no private practice. There's no, I'm a judge, it's like, and she's not like she's, retirement age. So it's like, it was just, I didn't know if you in that area had any idea, where she went off to.
I have colleagues there in Ozark and in Christian County, and nobody seems to know why or what happened.
Right,
so no. I don't know. I just know it causes a lot of my friends and family some irritation that I am a longtime detective. But I have a tendency to look at the evidence and look at the tracks and trails that are left. And the Soros group hands are all over the Missouri judiciary.
Right.
There are some really good people in the Missouri Prosecutors Association that take a stand against that. But like I said, when you've got judges that are required to go to these judges conferences, judges meetings, judges training, all of that stuff, and they are given a tremendous amount of Soros created training, and that comes back. It's an education program that really hurts us in the local judiciary.
So I know that COVID has kind of interfered with this. Back in 2020, I mean, right when this all came out, there was a quadruple homicide in Kansas City, Kansas. And that was committed by a gentleman that actually they just convicted him here recently, that had been released on a signature bond out of Jackson County under this new rules. And basically he was in the first year that this was in effect, he was one of the people that got out, and he and his co-defendant had both gotten released on signature bonds on the Missouri side. And then there was this quadruple homicide in a bar in Kansas City, Kansas. And I know that there was a lot of noise from the legislature at the time that, by God, we were going to roll this all back and we're going to get some stuff introduced here. And then COVID happened and it kind of put everything on the back burner. So, I mean, is there stuff? Are there potential bills, in the works? Or are they looking at stuff to maybe change around the presumption to where, you have to determine, the court has to determine that you're not a risk before they can give you a signature bond, rather than they have to determine that you are a risk before they can hold you?
Well, we have tried to float several bills through the legislature in Missouri over the last 5 years. And at some point, and even though the left is a small minority, they have found ways, and with COVID, they shut down the session early,
Right.
and stopped a lot of bills, and they did that a couple of years. They seem to be, we had some Republican representatives and senators who were allied with the Democrat. We've since gotten rid of a lot of those, so we're getting better. But it was difficult to get through common sense bills on anything, pro law enforcement, pro bail, pro victim. Just weren't getting through. They were getting killed. Then you had a year when the legislature fought each other. COVID put a stop to a lot of things in the first couple of years. Then when COVID was over and it came back, we're starting to see some movements toward more common sense laws and working on a long-term solution to the court problem.
So crime in Missouri since Rule 3301. I know that St. Louis and Kansas City are consistently in the top 10 cities in the country for violent crime and homicides, and whether that's COVID or quiet bail reform, which is what Rule 303 is. I like to use auto theft rates as a surrogate for overall crime, since people almost always have to report the theft of their car, and for insurance purposes, if nothing else. Whereas, some of you walk out and there's something stolen out of your yard or your backyard and somebody takes your shovel or something there, you probably aren't going to make a police report because it takes more time than to go get a new shovel, that sort of thing. I just was reading an article that KCR reported last year that in 2019, and that was the year that 3301 went into effect, there were 3,807 auto thefts in Kansas City, Missouri proper. And auto thefts have increased every single year. And the last data they had on that was 2023. And in 2023, there were over 9,000 car thefts in Kansas City, Missouri alone. So it went from 3,800 to 9,000. So 125, 130% increase in car thefts in Kansas City, Missouri alone. What do you think Rule 3301 is doing to crime in Missouri? I mean, I know everybody likes to say, crime is just a right-wing talking point, but, is it really, or is there really an increase in crime? These numbers seem to indicate that it is. How much of that can we attribute to Rule 3301?
Well, 3301 will contribute to some of it, but the behind the scenes is that when the Office of Supreme Court Administrators tells the local judges, you will adhere strictly to 3301. That has a greater effect because you and I both know, everyone knows, when there is no penalty for bad behavior, that behavior will continue and get worse. Basic fact of life. Okay, so when we stop prosecuting or penalizing the criminals, there's no penalty. They're going to go ahead and do it. What I saw in Missouri back about the time that COVID was ending was there was a battle between the Department of Corrections and legislature. The Department of Corrections wanted more money to operate, and the legislature didn't want to give them more money. So the Department of Corrections started telling courts and Department of Corrections, who also oversees probation and parole. Probation and parole became the the arm of the state who did or an assessment on what penalties should be assessed, whether this person should go to prison or be put on probation. And at first, I stood in the courtrooms and observed this. Every person was put on probation, regardless of how serious your crime was. And I'm talking pedophiles and people who committed atrocities against children would plead guilty, and like there again, goes through the jail. Hey, plead guilty, you're out the next day. That's basically what they started doing. They started pleading guilty to all these crimes, get put on probation, they're out of jail, back on the street. That's all they cared about. So it was a 3301 by itself wasn't the bad part. It was the administrative issues of 3301 and those things outside that 3301 allowed outside of the parameters of the statutes that really caused the problem. When you don't attach penalties, severe penalties, to committing a crime, you're not going to stop the crime. And auto theft is a prime example. And you're right; those are reported. Everyone has to report an auto theft to their insurance company. What I observed after the big change back in 2017, 2018, when the judges started giving everybody a free pass, what I observed was a lot of police officers, they'd get a call, report of a crime, and they would look at it and go, they'd show up on people's doorsteps to take the report, and they would say, well, the prosecutor's never going to prosecute this, they're never going to go to jail, so they didn't make the report. So crime went down because there were no reports of crime.
Right.
They refused to report it for one way or another, but a lot of officers were just disgruntled in the fact that they could not make a report on crime. And my personal experience in law enforcement, there's a lot of them that, hey, if I don't have to take a report, I don't have to write it up, so I'll go to the next call. That's
sure.
the reality.
You have the Ferguson effect, is real. And then that rolls over to the potential or the victims of these crimes. They're like, I'm not going to call the police and waste an hour doing this report and filling out this form and all this other stuff unless I have to. It's like, it's, especially if they come up and go, well, my son has a warrant for his arrest. If you're, I don't want the police here because they might arrest him, even though the neighbor just came and stole this stuff from me or just assaulted. Right. I mean, it's the 48 hours deal of, well, we were ripping off a drug dealer, the kind of person who can't report the fact that they were ripped off. So I mean, you get, it just depresses the overall system on that way. So
yes,
back when this also, I was looking through some of my old stuff and I saw an article that I'd posted that was from the Kansas City Star in 2020. And it gave an example of a Jackson County docket. I think this was the Independence Courthouse, that there were 368 cases on that docket, but only 7 defendants actually showed up for court for that docket. I mean, they'd been given signature bonds and citations and summonses and all this other stuff, but they simply weren't showing up for court. So what is your experience on the ground for these Rule 3301 releases as far as, what's their likelihood to come back?
They don't unless they get caught by a police officer somewhere. And if they cross the state line on a misdemeanor, which we're sitting right here next to Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas, they cross the state line and they can live there for years, have coffee with the local cops, and they'll never be picked up on it. Okay. If they're out on a surety bond, they're going to see me on their doorstep, regardless of where they go. Okay. Every corner of the United States, Mexico, and Canada, we've brought them back. Okay. So the victim, and one of the terms that I dislike vehemently is a victimless crime. There are no victimless crimes. You either have a victim a person who's a victim or society is a victim. Every criminal statute has a victim. So there is no such thing as a victimless crime. So the victim needs to be taken care of. The victim needs satisfaction. The victim needs closure. With a bail bondsman, regardless of where that defendant goes, we can go get them by U.S. Supreme Court rule.
Correct.
Okay. Now, there are several states, Kentucky, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, who have said, oh, no. If people come here, they're free. You can't come pick them up. Okay. So we've created safe zones, United States criminals to go. But if every person issued a surety bond, number one, the risk assessment would tell us whether they were a danger to an individual or to the community as a whole. Okay. Number two, we save the taxpayers money by saving the cost of the jail, those things. Number three, they're going to show up for court. Okay. If they don't show up, we're going to go get them and they're going to be in court and the victim has closure. So in reality, the bail bondsman is one of the most important segments of the criminal justice system. And I know you know this. I'm saying this for the benefit of the people. Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
Now back to your question about if they OR'd, did they not show up? Okay. No, they don't have to show up. Nobody's out there making sure they show up, making them call in, overseeing them, whatever. That's our job. Okay. So we're an invaluable part, should always be an invaluable part. It's the reason that a bail bond has been in effect for over 2,000 years and used across the world. So my job is to protect the victims of crime. Indirectly, I protect the victims of crime because if they're a dangerous community, I'm not getting them out. The judge may let them out, that's fine, but I'm not going to.
Well, I mean, if you do away with any sort of secured release, you're going to end up with a situation at the federal level, or like the New Mexico level, the federal level where, nobody gets out functionally. And they'll try and twist that around. I've seen somebody now making an argument that, well, 40% of that 75% of people in custody, they consented to stay there. It's like, they didn't consent to that. That's just a term of art that the federal courts are now using. If you don't challenge the detention order, you've consented to staying in custody. Well, you're not consenting to that. You're being denied bail. Or you then reverse that to the New Mexico standard where they let everybody go.
Yes, correct. And that's changing in New Mexico at the local judgeship level. Okay. And Gerald is starting to see that because the judges know this. They want to use this as a security device, but they're not allowed to. Okay. So it's happening everywhere across the United States. The best way to affect people to show up for court is through a bail bond. And there's all kinds of facts and figures that are thrown around. Well, 50% of people who get out on bail don't show up for court. Well, that's not correct. So let's take a look at this from a factual, mathematical point of view. Okay. A bail bondsman charges 10% get out of jail. Okay. So if a bail bondsman at the very beginning has 10% of the people don't show up for it, he's out of business.
Right.
But let's take it on. I charge 10%. I have to pay my agents 5% because they've got kids to raise, house to live in, bills to pay, food to put on the table, just like everybody else. So now back to me, that's 5%. I have to pay 2% to the insurance company. Now I'm down to 3%. With that 3%, I pay my office staff, my overhead expenses, my taxes, everything else.
And your bond forfeitures.
And bond forfeiture. So if I have 3 people out of 100 that I bond that doesn't show up for court and I have to pay the forfeiture on 3 people, I'm out of business. That's 3%. There is no other method of release that is that efficient at making sure people show up for court. It's impossible.
Well, yeah, and we've seen places, like Harris County Court Watch, .org has a deal on there tracking Harris County when they let everybody go, and they were having failure to appear rates in the low 80% range, and dismissal rates, of in that same range. But interesting, we talk about New Mexico. I think one of the reasons they're starting to change. When I was looking up the figures on like auto theft from Missouri, from the insurance departments or the car insurance people. One of the comparisons they're making, well, Missouri's in the top 7 as far as thefts, but it's 24% less than New Mexico. So now New Mexico's being held out as that's the standard. We don't want to be New Mexico, as what the numbers are. So anyway, I just found that sort of interesting and they don't seem to want to, get back to, hey, this was a mistake. Maybe we should roll this back. Because, I mean, the constitutional amendment allowed the preventive detention, but did not require them to let everybody go. That was a judicial decision that was made. Theoretically, they could roll that back if they chose to, and the legislature could take some steps on that. I just don't know how bad it has to get before the state legislature wants to say, okay, well, we need to pass some actual statutes to get a handle on this.
Well, I think it's starting to raise its ugly head, and they're starting to pay attention at the state level. And there are legislators who we've talked to that are beginning to understand this. The percentages that I just talked to you about, they're beginning to understand what's going on. They've been, the legislatures have been lobbied by the companies with the ankle monitors, the GPS, and that doesn't do anything to get people back to court. All it does is tell you where they're running around at, but that doesn't make them show up for court.
Or where they were when they cut the bracelet off.
Yes, correct. And the argument was that, well, bail bondsmen just charge people too much. It costs too much for bail bonds. The average cost of let's say a $10,000 bail bond is $8,000. That's a one-time fee that puts me on that bond. If you put a ankle monitor on that person, and the average length of time is 18 months for this case.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Exhaust. Now we're talking these poor defendants are having to pay over $5,000 to the GPS monitoring company during that time, 5 times what I would have charged. And the GPS company is not going to go chase them. They take off and go to California. Okay. They cut the monitor off. They go to California. Now it's back on law enforcement and the local jurisdiction, the local taxpayers, to bring them back. So there again, the bail bondsman is the best solution for the community, for the citizens, and for the courts.
Well, let me touch on one last thing here. Actually, two quickies, deal. I know that charitable bail has been kind of an issue. I haven't seen it a whole lot in the Kansas City area, but I think there was, I think the bail project was pretty heavily in St. Louis for a time. Is that still an ongoing thing in Missouri, or has that kind of fallen? I know that they made
Missouri shut that down.
Okay.
And the reason is, and I don't agree with this totally, but it did have that effect, that anyone that posts a bond, a cash bond, let's say you're in jail, bond's $1,000. Bail project would come and post $1,000. When your case was over, or let's say it's your aunt and uncle come and post $1,000. When the case was over, they expected to get that money back.
Right.
The bail project, aunt and uncle, mom, dad, whoever it was. Missouri changed the rules and said that the money for that bond, regardless of who posted it, has to be returned to the defendant.
It's a gift to the defendant, and so they can do whatever they choose to with it.
And the bail projects had to shut down because there was no benefit to them. They were losing money. So they're gone.
Well, good. Because I know that they made news over, they bonded out somebody who then went straight back out and killed the victim in the case. And so that got them some bad press, but that occurs every place where they operate, to one degree or another. All right. So one last thing here, and we'll kind of wrap this up because I know you've got other things to do. Missouri is one of these things, one of these states that recently has decriminalized or legalized some degree of marijuana. Are you seeing much impact from that on overall crime? I know it gets really annoying. You walk down the street and every third person smells like weed, but how is that in fact impacting crime overall?
Well, I see it from the back end of the investigation, the people that get arrested. I don't see a lot more people being arrested for abuse of marijuana. I see some driving while under the influence. I see some of that, but I have not seen a huge increase in real problem. Most of the time, what you see is lots and lots and lots of cars stacked up in the parking lot of the local marijuana dispensary.
Well, I mean, there's an argument though. I mean, it's still, it's the old gateway drug argument. Does that lead then to, I mean, anytime you legalize stuff, you're going to get more usage of it. So then does that lead people in, further down the road into other drugs? And I think we've seen Colorado, even though they'll argue against it, nobody starts off going, hey, my first drug of choice is fentanyl. And so, if you legalize something like marijuana and then you sort of like, well, then you make the argument, well, it's just all big pharma that's trying to block all this other stuff, from being used. And so then you're more inclined to use other illegal substances. So anyway.
Well, I have not seen that. And of course, I'm not in a position to see a lot of that kind of stuff like law enforcement is. But yes, it is a gateway drug. It always has been. The reason that marijuana was made illegal in the first place is because of the effects of the drug on the brain cells, and that plus the gateway path to the harder drugs. Alcohol was, they wanted to ban alcohol because, well, that was the devil's drink, and it was, but alcohol doesn't damage the body irreparably and the same as these illegal drugs do. And that's why they've been illegal for 150 years. So, but yes, the marijuana question, yes, it's going to lead to more, but there's also more education about fentanyl, and people are dying. There are people out there that a lot of these kids know who died from fentanyl. And so they're scared to take things that they don't know what is. Their friends hand them a pill. No, these kids don't do that anymore. Not like they used to. So it's kind of having a reverse effect there, the fentanyl problem. And maybe that's why I don't see it as much as I used to.
Right. So,
of course, the real hard drug crowd doesn't call me for business either.
So where can people find you and the Missouri Alliance of Professional Bail Bond Agents?
Well, the Missouri Alliance of Professional Bail Bond Agents is MAP-BBA.org.
Okay.
They can find me sitting in my easy chair in Carthage, Missouri, and they could go to AAAWayBailBonds.com.
So 3 A's and an away?
3 A's, way.
Okay, all right.
AAAWAY bail bonds.
Okay. Any problems with the auto club? I know there was a AAA bail bonds up here one time, 30 years ago. They got sued by the auto club.
No, this was an established business when I purchased it. So no, it's been around a long time. Okay. Now Paul Forbes and I, who are good friends, but Paul has AAA bail bonds in Parsons. And so when he promoted his bike club, I did get some benefit from that, but Paul and I are good friends, so that's great.
AAA way bail bonds, and I assume those both have websites and Facebook pages as well?
Yes.
All right, so that's a good place. So if you're in Southwest Missouri and need a good bond,
Google us, and if you're in Missouri, we'll come up first, top of the page.
All right, excellent. Yeah, Larry, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
You're welcome.
It's nice to know that you're active, because we really need active people at the legislative level, and taking our argument to the powers that be.
Well, and PBUS, our national organization, we're working hard. We've got some contacts inside the inner sanctum of the White House, and we're trying to get some things worked out with the new administration that would put bail back where it should be.
Well, hopefully, but then you have the knee-jerk reaction from the other half of the country that if the White House likes it, well, then it must be bad. So
I'm not sure it's half of the country. They always tout half the country, but I think he's on the 80% side for most everything.
And this should be an 80-20 issue. Letting criminals go with no security should be the 20% side of that issue. So I'm not quite sure. Yeah, or worse, exactly. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really do appreciate taking the time. Hopefully your wife's feeling better.
Okay. Take care.
Right. Thanks, Larry.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We would like to thank our guest, Larry Newman, president of the Missouri Alliance of Professional Bail Bond Agents, for taking the time to talk to us today. Staying organized is essential to the preservation of bail in the criminal justice system, and having people like Larry and the state bail bond associations is vitally important. We all have to work together to keep this going. And we hope that you'll join us at the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf and executive produced by David Stuckman.